Hey, everyone, and welcome to our deep dive on the Indian nationalist movement.
Oh, it's a good one.
It is a good one. This is a story about how one man, Mahatma Gandhi, became this symbol of resistance and helped India, break free from British rule. It's a story full of twists and turns and inspiring moments.
Definitely, yeah. And what I think is really cool about Gandhi is how he didn't just lead a movement, he kind of reshaped the very fabric of Indian nationalism. He
Yeah.
got the soul of India, I think especially that vast rural population, in a way that very few leaders ever have, I think.
Yeah, and I think that's something we're going to kind of see play out in this deep dive.
Definitely.
So let's set the scene. It's 1915. India's under British rule, of course, and Gandhi returns after spending 2 decades in South Africa. And, he'd already built a reputation fighting discrimination there. But India presented a whole new challenge.
Yeah, frankly.
Yeah, very different. Yeah, for sure. And the political landscape in India was super complex at the time. You had all these prominent figures like Lal, Bal, Pal, and they were advocating for more aggressive resistance against the British. And then on the other hand, you had these moderates like Gopal Krishna Gokhale, who was Gandhi's mentor, and he believed in more of a gradual reform-oriented approach.
So Gandhi steps into this bubbling cauldron of activism, and ideas. And one of his first major acts is this speech at the opening of the Banaras Hindu University in 1916. And I've read about this speech, and it's he really threw down the gauntlet.
Yeah, he did. This speech was a defining moment for sure, because Gandhi directly challenged the Indian elite, criticizing their disconnect from the struggles of the poor. He even made this really powerful statement. There is no salvation for India unless you strip yourselves of this jewelry and hold it in trust for your countrymen in India.
Wow.
Imagine the reaction in that room.
Oh, yeah.
To hear that. I mean, it's almost like he's saying this isn't just about independence. It's about building a new India where everyone has a stake.
Exactly. Yeah, he was sending a clear message that he was going to build a movement that was truly representative of all Indians, not just a select few.
So how did he go from this powerful speech to mobilizing millions? Did he just jump straight into massive protests and, nationwide campaigns?
Not quite. Gandhi was incredibly strategic. He understood that lasting change required deep roots. His early activism focused on very localized struggles, like his work in Champaran, where he fought for the rights of indigo farmers that were being exploited by British landlords.
So he's proving his commitment to the most vulnerable, and building this foundation of trust from the ground up. It's very different from just delivering speeches, and calling for immediate revolution.
Right, exactly. And these early campaigns, like the one in Ahmedabad, where he supported these textile workers who were demanding better wages, it served as a crucial testing ground for his methods. He was honing his skills in negotiation, in mobilization, and nonviolent resistance, and all the while he was building a base of support among the masses.
It's fascinating how those early localized campaigns were almost like mini laboratories where he was refining the strategies that he would later use on a national scale. But it seems like things took a dramatic turn in 1919 with the Rowlatt Act. And that really just inflamed tensions across India, didn't it?
For sure, yeah, absolutely. The Rowlatt Act, which basically allowed the British to imprison people without trial, was just seen as a direct attack on civil liberties. And then you had the horrific Jallianwala Bagh massacre, where British troops fired on unarmed civilians, killing hundreds. That event just sent shockwaves through the country.
It's hard to imagine how anyone could witness such brutality and not be moved to action. Did this push Gandhi to finally launch a nationwide movement?
It did. This was the pivotal moment. Gandhi launched the non-cooperation movement, calling on Indians to boycott British institutions and systems. It was a radical idea urging people to withdraw their consent from a system that they saw as unjust.
And this concept of non-cooperation is so interesting to me. Did it resonate with everyday Indians? Did people really buy into this idea of withdrawing from British institutions? I mean, wasn't that a huge risk for a lot of people?
It really was, and I think that's a testament to Gandhi's leadership because the non-cooperation movement gained widespread support. Students abandoned British-run schools and colleges, lawyers boycotted courts, workers went on strike, presidents refused to pay taxes, they were violating forest laws. It was really remarkable.
Wow. Sounds like people found their own ways to participate, almost like they were reinterpreting this call to action to fit their own circumstances and their own struggles.
Yeah, exactly. Gandhi had tapped into this wellspring of frustration and a deep desire for self-determination. But even then, his commitment to nonviolence remained absolute. When violence erupted during the movement, like the tragic incident at Chara, where police officers were killed, Gandhi took the step of calling off the entire campaign.
Wow. That decision to call off the movement must have been so difficult.
Uh-huh.
And I imagine some people probably even criticized him for it, right? Like they accuse him of losing momentum at a crucial moment.
Oh, absolutely, yeah. That decision was highly controversial even among his closest allies. Some felt like the movement had reached a tipping point and that he was letting this golden opportunity slip away. But for Gandhi, that principle of nonviolence was just non-negotiable.
So even though the non-cooperation movement was relatively short-lived, it had a profound impact, I think. It showed the British that their control was not absolute, and it cemented Gandhi's status as a national leader. But was he just a leader, or was there something more to his appeal?
So by this point, Gandhi had become like a symbol. He was a beacon of hope for millions. People started calling him Mahatma, which means great soul. He was no longer just a political figure. He was revered as a spiritual guide, a moral compass for a nation yearning for freedom.
So what was it about him that set him apart from other leaders? Was it simply his charisma or his message of nonviolence?
Well, it was a combination of factors, I think. He embodied a unique blend of political acumen and spiritual depth. He dressed simply, spun yarn on a charka, and he embraced manual labor. He was deliberately blurring these lines between the elite and the common person.
It's like he was rejecting the trappings of power and saying, I am one of you.
Right, exactly. He understood the power of symbolism and connected with people on a visceral level. There's this research by Shahid Amin that has shown how rumors of Gandhi's miraculous powers were spread among peasants, further elevating him to an almost mythical status.
So it wasn't just his ideas, it was his image, his lifestyle, the stories that were circulating about him. He was almost like a folk hero, someone who embodied the hopes and aspirations of the masses.
That's a great way to put it, yeah. And it's important to remember that Gandhi was also a brilliant strategist. Like, his movements weren't just spontaneous uprisings. He built a complex organizational network with new Congress branches across the country, communication in local languages and Praja mandals that spread this message of nationalism within princely states.
So he's got this incredible charisma, this almost a spiritual authority, but he's also like a master organizer. He's building a movement from the ground up. He's meticulously planning and executing his strategies. It's remarkable.
Yeah, he was definitely ahead of his time. And as impressive as all these early achievements were, he was just getting started. After a period of focusing on social reforms, Gandhi was about to return to the political arena with a campaign that would just capture the imagination of the world. So by the late 1920s, this demand for complete independence, or Purna Swaraj, was really gaining momentum. And the Indian National Congress, under the leadership of Jawaharlal Nehru, officially declared this goal, in December of 1929.
So it feels like we're entering like a new phase of the movement here, one where the stakes are even higher. Gandhi's earlier campaigns, while impactful, were primarily focused on specific issues or localized grievances. Now the goal is nothing short of complete independence.
Yeah, exactly. And Gandhi, ever the astute strategist, knew that he needed a campaign that would resonate with every single Indian, regardless of background, religion, social status. He needed something that would touch the lives of every single household, something that would become a powerful symbol of resistance, against British rule.
And he found that symbol in salt. It seems so simple, so basic, but the salt tax was a brilliant target, wasn't it?
Oh, absolutely. Salt was an essential commodity, something that everybody needed. Yet the British government had imposed this complete monopoly on its production and sale. Indians were forbidden from making their own salt, even for personal use. And so this law was deeply unpopular, seen as a prime example of British oppression.
So it's almost like the salt tax became a microcosm of the entire colonial system. It was a daily reminder of British control over every aspect of Indian life. And Gandhi's genius was in recognizing this symbolic power of salt and turning it into this focal point for resistance.
And in March of 1930, Gandhi launched the Salt Satyagraha. He embarked on this 240-mile march from his ashram in Sabarmati to the coastal village of Dandi. And he planned to make salt from seawater, directly defying the British law.
It's such a powerful image, like this seemingly frail man walking for weeks, gathering thousands of supporters along the way, all to challenge the might of the British Empire with this simple act of making salt.
The Salt March captured the world's attention. Newspapers across the globe were publishing photos of Gandhi and his followers, and the British government found itself in a very, very difficult position. Initially, they seemed to underestimate the impact of the march, but they quickly realized that this was more than just a symbolic act.
So I can imagine like the debates that were happening within the British administration at the time. Like some officials probably just dismissed Gandhi as a nuisance, while others must have recognized the growing threat that he posed to their authority.
Right, and the viceroy at the time, Lord Irwin, actually received a letter from Gandhi informing him of his plan. And you can almost sense the tension in those letters, this clash of wills between a man armed with nothing but conviction and an empire that's determined to maintain its control.
And it wasn't just the march itself. The Salt Satyagraha really sparked a wave of protests and acts of civil disobedience across India. And it seems like people saw this as an opportunity to express their own grievances against British rule.
Absolutely. It became a nationwide movement. Peasants were violating forest laws. They were refusing to pay taxes. They were asserting their rights over resources. Factory workers were organizing strikes, demanding better wages, better working conditions. Lawyers continued their boycott of British courts, and students were staying away from government-run schools and colleges.
So the Salt Satyagraha really became this catalyst, this unifying force that brought together people from all walks of life, each with their own struggles, but united in this desire for freedom.
The British response was swift and brutal. Tens of thousands of people were arrested, including Gandhi himself. But if you look at the British records from that time, particularly the police reports and the internal memos, you can sense this growing anxiety within the administration.
It's as if they'd realized that they were facing something that they hadn't encountered before, like a mass movement that couldn't be crushed with brute force alone.
Exactly. The Salt Satyagraha exposed the limitations of colonial power and demonstrated the power of nonviolent resistance on just an unprecedented scale. Even Time magazine, which had initially mocked Gandhi, had to acknowledge the strength of his movement as it gained international attention.
So the Salt Satyagraha really put immense pressure on the British government, forcing them to reevaluate their approach to India. And this ultimately led to the Roundtable conferences in London, where the British attempted to negotiate India's future. But the first conference held in 1930 was a failure, wasn't it?
It was because Gandhi wasn't even there. The British had to acknowledge that any sort of meaningful negotiation would require Gandhi's presence and participation. So he was released from prison, and the Second Roundtable Conference was held in 1931. But this time, Gandhi faced challenges not just from the British, but from within India itself.
So it seems like the question of who represented India was becoming increasingly complex. It wasn't just this simple binary between the British and the Indians anymore. There were multiple voices, competing interests, different visions for what an independent India should look like.
Right, exactly. The Muslim League, under the leadership of Muhammad Ali Jinnah, demanded separate representation for Muslims, arguing that their interests wouldn't be protected under a Hindu-majority government. The princes who ruled over their own territories resisted any attempts by the Congress to interfere in their affairs.
And then you have B.R. Ambedkar, a brilliant lawyer and scholar, who argued that both the Congress and Gandhi didn't fully represent the interests of the Dalits, the untouchables, who faced deep-seated discrimination within Indian society.
Yeah, and the issue of separate electorates became this major point of contention. Ambedkar believed that separate electorates were essential for ensuring political representation for Dalits, while Gandhi vehemently opposed the idea, arguing that it would further divide the nation along caste lines.
These debates really reveal, I think, the inherent tensions within the movement itself, the different perspectives on what freedom meant and how it should be achieved. And with the failure of the Second Roundtable Conference, it seems like this momentum for negotiation was stalling.
Yeah, it was. And back in India, the new Viceroy Lord Willingdon took a very hard-line stance against the Congress, and Gandhi even referring to him as unpractical, mystical, and superstitious in a private letter.
It's as if the British were swinging back and forth between attempting to appease Gandhi and then cracking down on him and his followers. Was this a sign of their own internal divisions on how to handle the situation?
It's certainly possible, yeah. The political landscape was constantly shifting both in India and in Britain. The 1935 Government of India Act, though falling short of complete independence, did grant limited self-governance to India. And this led to Congress victories in provincial elections. And this was a significant development because it gave Congress experience in running governments and further demonstrated their popularity among the Indian people.
So by the late 1930s, the Congress is in this position of power in many parts of India. But then World War II breaks out and throws everything into disarray. How did the war impact the independence movement? Did Gandhi and the Congress support the British war effort?
The war presented this very complex dilemma for the Indian leadership. Gandhi and Nehru were both deeply opposed to fascism and Nazism. They believed in fighting for freedom and democracy. But they were also reluctant to support a war effort that seemed designed to preserve the British Empire.
So it must have been so frustrating. They
Yeah.
wanted to contribute to the fight against tyranny, but they also saw this as an opportunity to leverage their support for independence.
Right, and they offered their cooperation in the war effort in exchange for a guarantee of independence after the war. But the British, and particularly Prime Minister Winston Churchill, were hesitant to let go of their prized colony. Churchill famously declared that he had not become the king's first minister in order to preside over the liquidation of the British Empire.
Wow, so it seems like both sides were kind of trapped in this stalemate, and their positions were hardened by mistrust and competing priorities. What was the outcome of these negotiations?
Well, the talks broke down, and the Congress ministries resigned in protest, and the situation just grew increasingly tense. Many within the Congress, particularly younger leaders like Subhas Chandra Bose, felt that Gandhi's pacifist approach was inadequate in the face of such intransigence. They believed that a more forceful response was necessary to achieve independence.
So there's this growing sense of frustration even within the Congress itself.
Yeah.
The war is raging, the British are refusing to budge on this question of independence, and Gandhi's commitment to nonviolence is being challenged by those who believe the more aggressive tactics are needed. And this really sets the stage for what would become Gandhi's final and perhaps most controversial campaign, the Quit India movement.
Right. And to truly understand the impact of the Quit India movement, we need to consider how the political landscape in India had transformed during the preceding decades. Gandhi had gone from being this relatively unknown figure to becoming this national icon, mobilizing millions and forcing the British to acknowledge the inevitability of Indian independence.
But at the same time, new political forces and fault lines had emerged, complicating the path to freedom. The Muslim League's demand for a separate Muslim state was gaining traction, and internal divisions within the Congress itself were becoming increasingly apparent. The stage was set for a final confrontation, and Gandhi once again was at the center of it all. So we left off with the sense of anticipation and tension building in India. It's 1942, World War II is raging, and Gandhi's about to launch his most dramatic campaign yet, the Quit India movement. Can you tell us more about what led up to this pivotal moment?
Well, by 1942, the political climate in India had reached a boiling point. The failure of the Cripps mission, which had attempted to negotiate like a post-war settlement, but offered very little in terms of immediate independence, just further fueled those frustrations. And Gandhi, sensing this widespread discontent, decided to escalate the struggle against British rule.
And the slogan he chose for this campaign was so powerful, Quit India. It was such a direct and unambiguous demand. It must have sent shockwaves through the British establishment.
Yeah, Quit India really captured the essence of the movement's demands. It wasn't about negotiation or compromise anymore. It was about asserting India's right to self-determination in the strongest possible terms. The movement aimed to bring the British administration to a standstill through mass civil disobedience, forcing them to concede to the demand for independence.
But didn't the British respond with immediate and harsh repression? I remember reading that Gandhi and many other Congress leaders were arrested almost as soon as the movement was launched.
Yeah, they did. The British reaction was swift and severe. Within hours of Gandhi's call for Quit India, he, along with the entire Congress leadership, was arrested. The government declared the movement illegal and mobilized its forces to suppress any form of protest.
So how did the movement continue without its leadership? Was it effectively crushed by the British crackdown?
Well, surprisingly, the Quit India movement didn't just fizzle out. It took on a life of its own. Fueled by the anger and the frustration of the masses, young activists, many inspired by socialist ideals and eager for a more radical approach than Gandhi's nonviolence, took the lead in organizing these underground networks, protests, and even acts of sabotage against the British administration.
It sounds like the movement became much more decentralized and in some ways more radical than Gandhi had perhaps envisioned. Was there any particular event or incident that kind of stands out as a symbol of this shift?
Well, there were several instances of what were essentially independent governments declared in various districts directly challenging British authority. For example, in Satara, Maharashtra, and Medinipur, Bengal, local leaders established parallel administrations and refused to recognize British rule. These acts of defiance, although short-lived, really demonstrated the intensity of the movement's commitment and the challenges that the British faced in controlling a population that had largely turned against them.
So the British must have been caught off guard by the resilience of the movement, especially given their swift action in arresting the leadership. It's a testament to the depth of feeling that Gandhi had cultivated, that the movement continued, even intensified in his absence.
Right, and it's important to note that the British response to the Quit India movement was incredibly harsh. There were widespread arrests, detentions without trial, and instances of police brutality. The government used wartime regulations to justify its crackdown, portraying the movement as a threat to the war effort.
So the Quit India movement, while ultimately suppressed, had a significant impact on the course of the independence struggle. It demonstrated the Indian people's unwavering commitment to freedom and forced the British to confront the reality that their hold on India was slipping away. But while the Congress leaders were imprisoned and the Quit India movement was being brutally suppressed, another political force was gaining ground: the Muslim League.
That's right. The Muslim League, under Muhammad Ali Jinnah, really saw an opportunity to advance their own agenda for a separate Muslim state. While the Congress leaders were in prison, the League was able to strengthen its position, particularly in key provinces like Punjab and Bengal, where they had less influence previously. They portrayed themselves as the true representatives of Muslim interests, arguing that the Congress was dominated by Hindus and could not be trusted to protect Muslim rights in an independent India.
It seems like the political landscape was becoming increasingly complex. The Quit India movement, while uniting many Indians against British rule, also highlighted this growing divide between the Congress and the Muslim League, a divide that would have tragic consequences in the years to come.
Yeah, and the end of World War II brought renewed hope for independence, but it also brought to the forefront the deep divisions that had been simmering beneath the surface. The Labour Party, which came to power in Britain in 1945, was committed to granting India independence, but they were also faced with the challenge of negotiating a settlement that would address the demands of both the Congress and the Muslim League.
It sounds like an incredibly difficult situation. How could they possibly reconcile these seemingly irreconcilable visions for India's future?
Well, despite several attempts at negotiation, including those led by the Viceroy Lord Wavell and later by Lord Mountbatten, the gulf between the Congress and the Muslim League just seemed insurmountable. The Muslim League, emboldened by their electoral success in the 1946 provincial elections, where they won a majority of the Muslim reserve seats, just intensified their demand for a separate Muslim state. They argued that Muslims would face discrimination and persecution in a Hindu-majority India, and that partition was the only way to guarantee their safety and security.
And tragically, this growing divide led to violence. Jinnah's call for Direct Action Day in August 1946, aimed at pressuring the British to concede to their demand for Pakistan, triggered horrific communal riots in Calcutta, which then spread to other parts of the country. It was a dark chapter in India's history marked by bloodshed, displacement, and unspeakable suffering.
The communal violence that erupted in 1946 really shocked and horrified people across India. It became clear that the country was on the verge of a catastrophic civil war, and the British government realized that a swift resolution was needed, even if it meant partitioning the country.
So on August 15, 1947, India finally achieved its long-fought-for independence. But it came at a heartbreaking cost: the partition of the country into two separate states, India and Pakistan. It must have been a bittersweet moment for Gandhi, the man who had dedicated his life to a united and independent India.
Indeed. While the world celebrated India's independence, Gandhi marked the day with a fast deeply saddened by the partition and the communal violence that had accompanied it. He spent his final months trying to heal the wounds of division, traveling to riot-torn areas, urging peace and reconciliation between Hindus and Muslims. He remained committed to his vision of a secular India, a place where people of all faiths could live together in harmony.
It's a vision that continues to resonate today as India grapples with its complex and diverse identity. But tragically, Gandhi's life was cut short just a few months after independence. He was assassinated on January 30, 1948, by a Hindu nationalist who opposed his message of reconciliation. It was a devastating loss for a nation struggling to come to terms with its newfound freedom and the trauma of partition.
His assassination was a global tragedy. It was a stark reminder that even the most profound message of peace and nonviolence couldn't always triumph over hatred and intolerance. But even in death, Gandhi's legacy continued to inspire people around the world. He became a symbol of hope, a beacon for those fighting for justice and equality.
Gandhi's story is such a complex and multifaceted one. He was a man of contradictions, a spiritual leader who engaged in the messy world of politics, a pacifist who led a revolution, a unifier who ultimately couldn't prevent the division of his nation. But despite these complexities, his impact on India and the world is undeniable.
He showed the power of nonviolent resistance, the strength of conviction, and the importance of standing up for what is right, even in the face of overwhelming odds. His legacy continues to inspire movements for social change, reminding us that even small acts of courage and compassion can make a difference in the world.
It's been a truly fascinating journey exploring the life of Mahatma Gandhi and the Indian nationalist movement. It's a story filled with both triumph and tragedy, with moments of great inspiration and deep sorrow. But above all, it's a story that reminds us of the enduring power of the human spirit to strive for freedom, for justice, and for a better world.
Thank you for joining us on this deep dive. We hope you've gained a deeper understanding of this complex and pivotal period in history, and we encourage you to continue exploring the life and legacy of Mahatma Gandhi, a man whose message of peace and nonviolence continues to resonate across time and borders.